barge leaked a great deal of ammonia, and I became exposed for a prolonged period of time to ammonia and had some serious health effects from that ended my career.
Welcome back to Everyone Has a Story. True tales from everyday life. We're glad you're here. Now this story is about Master Captain Jay Wiek, a former towboat skipper, and his life-threatening assignment on the Mississippi River. Danger comes often, invisible and deadly, like a damaged barge with an ammonia leak on board. Captain Jay was assigned to move it, and that exposure tragically and forever changed his life. From his home upstream on the Columbia River, Captain Jay Wiek shares what happened to him and the toll it's taken on his life. Here's Captain Jay and the rest of the story.
The accident was a ammonia leak. I was pushing multiple ammonia barges. I was on the Mississippi River, just downriver from St. Louis, a little ways. And there had been an accident. One of the other boats had hit a lock wall and damaged their ammonia barge. And since I was going back down with empty barges, the office asked me to run up and to grab that barge and to take it along. And that, sounds a lot easier than it was, I guess. By the time you're doing something, particularly when you're dealing with something like ammonia and that the Coast Guard, of course, the regulatory body that we worked under, they had to, basically evaluate the situation. We'd submit in what we were going to do from the office and taking this. And then they gave us a permission to proceed or a permit to proceed. And supposed to keep the barge in the situation that they tell you it's the safest. And so you have pretty much a set tow. And yeah, going down the river, and it was hot, very hot. In fact, I think it was slightly over 100 degrees, and the cooling systems on the barges weren't working good. And by adding this damaged barge to the tow, it made it a little more, just a more dangerous situation to keep an eye on. And I'm not sure legally what I can tell you about it, but I'll just say that barge leaked a great deal of ammonia, and I became exposed for a prolonged period of time to ammonia and had some serious health effects from that ended my career. The ammonia created a reactive airway, and in my situation, if I get around colognes, perfumes, scented fabric things, just too much of any strong scents, but mostly chemicals. And that I always think it's funny. I can walk by a lavender plant or a lemon tree, and they're very fragrant. They never bother me. But if I walk by some kid that's wearing cologne, and I'm 30 feet from him, and it's on strong enough that he probably bathed in it, I tend to just quit breathing. That's at first, it's a very scary thing when you can't get your breath in that, and it's hard to react. And after a few times when you go unconscious and they tell you you've had many strokes during this, and in my case, damaged a heart valve and stuff from not getting oxygen, it made it so that I'm not near as interested in walking by those kids wearing cologne anymore. So I stay to myself quite a bit. I could never say for sure about cancer. I don't think anybody knows what you're dealt along the way. And it would be a futile effort and a waste of time on my part to try to pinpoint that, when the fact is I have the problem, but who knows why. As far as the breathing, yeah, I did not have any of those problems prior to, and I think, at least my opinion, that it's a direct cause from that. And I think the doctors pretty much have agreed with me on all of that. During the Korean War, there was a colonel at Chosun Reservoir that the comment was made to him from a local press person that he was the first Marine Corps commander to have a full division in retreat. And his response, as I understood it, was retreat hell. I'm just attacking in a different direction. And I love history, and I love reading it and studying people and that. I thought to myself, particularly in my situation now, that's the best approach for me too. I'm not going to attack into an area that I can't win, and that, but I'm going to figure out which way I can go, and so I'm going to recorrect my course and go to that. And some of that may be the teachings back to my dad again, and the reason I say that is, like making a landing, running a boat. You've been on ships, people have been on, and you can see how things are setting. My mind works different than I guess most of the people when I was training. They kind of looked at me with a funny look, but the way I would do, say you're approaching a lock and you've set your course on it, you've created your rudder angle and working with the current and the wind, and you're lining up on that lock. Well, to me, everything that you do in my mind is forming triangulation, and it's a navigational problem basically. But what my dad had told me, and so I incorporated into that, is don't live in the past, deal with what you have in front of you. And so consequently, if I'm coming in on a lock and we'll say the wind changes from 5 miles an hour blowing, across from the starboard side to 20 miles an hour, well, all of a sudden you're going to have to change what you're doing. So for me, rather than just randomly changing, I restart the equation in my head. So if I was coming in with 4 degrees of rudder and 1,000 RPM on the engines or whatever, well, I just started a new equation. And so I lined up with what I saw that worked. And maybe now I'm using 5 degrees of rudder, and maybe I had to kick up the horsepower a little bit. But I restart the equation from right then. And so I'm not living in the past anymore, and I'm not trying to hold or correct that course. I'm forming an entire new one, and so that it's all current and happening that coincides with what the weather and what the situation is. And that's just what works for me. And it's what I tried to explain to others, that if you just restart and reconnect going forward, you don't get caught up so much in, what's going on behind you or in the past. And so whether it's life or whether it's running a boat, I know the cancer team, you mentioned that. They were always amused that I said that one of the first things I was taught, on a boat is if you're going to change course, the earlier you change course, the less dramatic the course change has to be. And it's life in general, but it definitely works on a boat. If you're coming up and you wait to the last minute, well, now it's a drastic and you've got to come up on horsepower. But if you do it earlier, it's a very small change on things that makes your correction. And I don't know about other people, maybe they're smarter than me. Smaller the change, the easier for me. I live out in Clackamas County in Oregon, and I keep myself busy on the property. There's a lot of deer and elk and a variety of wildlife, and so I've created trails. And so I walk. I try to walk if I can, if my breathing will allow it, which I think the walking helps my breathing allow things. But I try to walk 4 or 5 miles a day on the hills and the trails going around on the property, and spend my time looking at deer and elk and enjoying it. And I very rarely leave. This is my world. It's my ocean, if you will. And one of my neighbors one time, and a sad story to tell on myself, but it's a true story, so I guess I can go for it. But I was trying to make one of these trails, and so I was in a mask and everything so that I could breathe, and I had my tractor trying to mow over the area that I'd cut and cleared. And my neighbor is watching me, and he would help me out at different times. And he waves at me when I come back in, and he goes, you shouldn't turn at an angle on those hills and stuff. You got to be careful on that tractor doing those trails. And I said, yeah, I treat it like the ocean. I don't get myself sideways in the trough. So that kind of, was going ahead. And he kind of looked at the ground and he chuckled and he looked at me and he said, well, I was telling my wife the other day after watching you with that tractor, it's a terrible break you got with that chemical exposure and stuff. But he said, I think that tractor is going to kill you long before those chemicals do after watching you run that. And I got to laugh, and I thought to myself, I'm treating this just like I did in the ocean, and accomplishing and running my angles and everything is still relating to how I spent my career out there. And that, but I realized again that somebody sitting back and watching, they don't know what you're doing. And so they can only relate it to what they've done and stuff. And so he was just worried me being up on the hill, and I never had any thought to turn sideways and trying to do something on it. But, he didn't know that. And it just amused me that I thought about it for a little bit, that, sometimes you think you're in good control of something and somebody else thinks that you're not, and I guess the basic thing is you better stay with what you know and what you can do.
Yeah.
I think that the industry that I'm in has become more open now. I think that it was kind of a who you know thing back when I got into it. Obviously, my family was around it, and it wasn't that, it was people putting pressure on or making things happen. You had the ability to know when a job was open. I mean, I can remember going down to Crowley and I wanted to go work there. I was one of the tug companies that was here in the local area, and they're worldwide. But because I knew from being in the industry what day crew changes were for each boat and for the companies and stuff like that, I could go down to Crowley with my duffel bag packed and just sit there. And if somebody was sick or didn't show up, I made myself very available to go to work very quickly. I didn't have to have the dispatcher go back to his book. All he had to do is look up and say, go get on the boat. And I think that was an advantage from being within the industry and knowing when things were going to happen that people on the outside don't have. There's a greater opportunity now. I think if I had it to do over again, I would say, get down and learn something. There are college programs that you can get in, and you can get a certain amount. And I find some of these people to be tremendously talented individuals. But even for them, I would say it'd be smarter to go spend a year or maybe two actually going on the boat and realizing, because you just don't know what you don't know until you get out there and do something. And I think that once you get in and you start to do the job, that it's easier to become educated and move forward with it. And that was something that I felt was very beneficial to me, as growing up around it and hearing people talk. It gave me, if you will, college education courses from people that had life experiences doing it. And I was able to benefit from the knowledge of others and listened and really tried to learn from those people. I would say that within the industry, the best advantage and the best thing you can have is to never stop learning, to try to always upgrade your ability. And I think one of the things that I look back, and other people probably think it's a negative thing, and I take it as a tremendous advantage for the way I approached it in life, would be that I continued to learn. And so consequently, I was told by a couple of people, and it meant a lot to me, that they thought that in my lifetime, I have run more separate river miles in North America than anybody possibly in history. It was because I traveled. Most people stay in an area, they're secure. I ran the entire Mississippi system from New Orleans to St. Paul to Pittsburgh and up the Tennessee to Chattanooga and such. But I also worked the Columbia River. I ran over 1,000 miles of the Yukon River and the Sacramento River all the way up. And so in North America, I always went, and it got to be to the point when I learned that, it made me want to go to the next river. So like when I was in Alaska, I wanted to go to the Mackenzie River, and it made me then focus out ahead, but it also made it so I was never afraid to start over and go to a new area to learn something new. And I think that was the key, was the more you can stay engaged and continue to learn and have new experiences, I think that's the thing that I appreciated most, and what I would want to try to help other people is not to get stuck where you're afraid to go ahead. Don't stop. Move ahead. Learn. Even on the negative side, I think that it was a great asset to me that even when I was working, I never felt like anything was out of my control. If somebody told me something that I didn't want to do, I would very politely say, you know what, it's your boat, it's your operation. You can do anything that you wish to do. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to do it. So you're going to need a different captain because whatever the reason was, whether it wasn't safe for somebody or whatever it was, but to stand up and to be honest about what you were, because you weren't afraid of learning something new or doing something new. And I think that all played into the overall career, I guess, that I got to appreciate as being open to going forward always.